Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. If you've ever seen a high school basketball game, a local church service, or your next door neighbor on television, chances are you're watching a public access cable station. Today on Inner Compass, we'll find out why these stations are so vital to our communities and how their futures might be threatened. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Laurie Cirivello, Executive Director of the Community Media Center in Grand Rapids, having recently arrived from another community access station in Santa Rosa, California. Welcome to the show and to Michigan, Laurie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Every week, something like 20,000 hours of new original programming appears on public access, community access television stations across the country. How did community access TV come into existence?
Well, Grand Rapids Access Center has been around for 25 years. Before that, though, there were a number of projects and experiences and experiments that tried to leverage the power of the new Sony Portapack, basically a portable capturing device that video camera. They call it a Portapack, but it was actually quite heavy and bulky. But there were a number of experiments that, for the first time, really attempted to put the power of media acquisition and storytelling electronically into hands of real people. And those projects were very fruitful. In Canada, there were a number of projects, and in New York. And from that came the idea that local communities could really more formalize this. And cable companies came into existence, and part of how cable companies have to do business is to access public rights of way, right. Which is
for wiring,
right? So basically for private business using public space, and the formula that was developed basically said part of how we will work the deal so the cable company can use this public space is to provide ways for them to give back, and thus the franchising process, and it gets rather complicated, but really that was the beginning, the idea that the community should be able to get something back directly related to telecommunications when a communications company uses public rights of way.
Okay, so the cable company provides what in the businesses are called PEGs, Public Education and Government Access TV stations.
Well, yes, and it can be that. While it used to be required many years ago, before I was involved in this field, basically the FCC allows individual communities to negotiate the value of those rights of way to the cable company. Part of the compensation package that is allowed and somewhat defined is that communities can request channels for public, education, or government access purposes. And many communities do all three.
And just, these are not to be confused with public broadcasting stations.
Correct.
This is not public television.
Public television is a broadcast which goes through the air. Cable obviously doesn't. It's a closed system. It's a subscriber-based system. Right. And so communities were basically given guidelines from the FCC that said what they can ask for and negotiate for in local franchise negotiations. And Grand Rapids and many, many other cities across the country and communities have done just that to leverage the power of local resources for the greater good.
And Grand Rapids has a really surprisingly healthy, the Community Media Center is not only the public access television, but you provide websites and live theater and...
Well, the intention behind the Media Center is really not about television per se. It is about collecting, managing, taking care of, and leveraging the power of all sorts of multimedia resources to assist in the work of the community, to help us communicate better, to help democratize media, to help offset the concentration of power that has and continues to occur in the commercial media world. So Grand Rapids, and this certainly predates me, having only been here a few months, Grand Rapids has been really a leader in understanding and interpreting that greater mission. There are many community media centers that are attempting to follow a similar philosophy, including Santa Rosa, where I came from, which is only 10 years old and looked to Grand Rapids for inspiration. Wow. But the big difference is probably the variety of resources here in Grand Rapids at the Community Media Center. There is, of course, typical, normal, understandable public access television. Mm-hmm. There's also Livewire, which is another channel that is sort of a shared regional channel that has longer form programming and things that don't necessarily fit either structurally into the GRTV model. But we also operate, manage, caretake, if you will, WYCE, which is a 7,000 watt FM radio station. We have GrandNet, which provides IT services for
Internet.
Right, nonprofits, website development, custom database work, all of those tools that nonprofits can benefit from.
And can individuals also use that?
That is at this time strictly for nonprofit organizations. We also have GRID, which is the Grand Rapids Institute for Information Democracy. Yes. And that's a really important key arm of what we do because it deals with the concept of media literacy. It's more than just teaching people to use the tools. It's understanding how to apply those skills once you have them.
And how to respond to what you see and what information you receive.
Correct. Yeah. How to understand and deconstruct media. I always find it very interesting. Done a lot of work in schools. And I've raised 2 kids myself. Well, I shouldn't say myself. My husband certainly helped. But we have raised kids in today's world, in this very media-intensive world. And it's interesting that schools are very good traditionally at teaching students how to read and how to write, that being a communication, the primary communication means. But so many of the kids receive their information electronically, and yet we don't necessarily do a terrific job yet of teaching students how to deconstruct those.
To interpret and analyze and
the
criticize.
Same way we do with writing.
Right.
And then, not only that, we don't just teach students to read, but we teach them to write. So an important component of media literacy is also the construction of messages. So GRID is very involved with that, also involved with reaching out and making sure that all voices have the opportunity to be heard and that there is a broader range of thought and voice that's represented, at least in local media. And then it keeps going.
Sure. Yeah.
We also have, most recently, and I always worry that I'm going to forget a component, that would be bad. Most recently, though, we have acquired Wealthy Theater.
Yes. Yeah.
Wealthy Theater is really a key anchor property in the Wealthy Street neighborhood, which is a neighborhood that is taking great strides in rejuvenation and it's an important property. And my understanding, and again this is secondhand, was the media center was approached and asked, would you consider undertaking this because it is so important to this neighborhood. Media center was out of room. And also the idea of encouraging conversation and having a gathering place for the community and the expression of media and live performance certainly fit within our mission. So you add that to then our youth training opportunities and all of the other services, and it's a constantly changing kind of environment.
It's really quite remarkable, yeah. The PEGs, the Community Access TV stations, which are just a part of what Community Media Center does in Grand Rapids, the PEGs are recently threatened by proposed legislation that would affect the telecommunications networks first and then the cable companies. Telephone companies, there are 3 big telephone companies now in the United States, right? AT&T, Qwest, and Verizon control virtually all the United States.
Pretty much.
And because telecommunications companies now can offer, in addition to phone service, internet and cable TV.
The triple threat.
They want to enter the cable TV business, and because they are so much bigger corporations, they don't want to have to negotiate with each community as the cable companies have traditionally done, right?
Correct.
So the proposed legislation would eliminate that need to negotiate with local communities.
Yes.
And make just broader agreements. How does that threaten what you're doing?
There are many pieces of legislation in most states are undergoing, attempting to do franchising at the state level. But the the most sweeping ones, of course, are at the federal level. There's already been a House bill passed, and there's a federal bill that could be passed soon, if not already, by the time this is broadcast. And the real issue is that, as you said, large bell companies do not want to have to negotiate on the local basis. The problem is that local communications are unique. The needs of local communities are unique. Local communities have been able to include in these franchise agreements some very important specifications and protections for the local community. For instance, redlining. At the current time, a franchise basically says the cable company that's using rights of way must provide opportunity for all of our residents and cannot pick and choose based on income level and etc.
So the lines, the cable lines, have to be available in the smaller suburbs and in poorer neighborhoods.
Correct. The threat with many of the pieces that we are seeing in the national scope don't offer that protection. Basically allow a company to pick and choose who is going to be connected and who is not, and who is going to have the opportunity for competition, which theoretically lowers prices, and who is not. And so some of the people that can be the most damaged in this are the people who need opportunity the most. The other key is that there are formulas on how communities have negotiated the value of their local rights of way. One size does not fit all when it comes to this. There are provisions about customer service. Currently, if you have a problem with your service, there is someone here in Grand Rapids that you can call, absolutely, who basically takes care and makes certain that the terms of the franchise are clearly adhered to by the cable company. The one bill that I'm most familiar with, you would have to call the FCC to get your complaint resolved. Even though this isn't federal property, these are local rights of way. And so fundamentally at the base of it is large corporations are getting the federal government, if this goes through, to usurp local authority and to basically strip away our local community's opportunity to leverage what we have as resources.
It seems likely, from what I've read, that bill will pass eventually. But you have sort of a bigger vision. I'm assuming that cable companies would also be affected by that. If the telecommunications companies don't have to negotiate locally, why should the cable companies have
Correct.
to? Right?
It does, in a sense, level the playing field down. While initially it is trying to create rules for new entrants into the market, once and somebody had entered, then there would be issues about equity, for the incumbent provider, which would be the cable company. I do personally believe that something is going to get passed. There's an awful lot of work going on, though, from people who are interested to see that local interests are protected as much as possible in whatever legislation happens. It's uncertain at this point what will happen. I think probably, people will say, oh, well, it's a couple of television stations. Is it worth all the hullabaloo? I really think there are two key things that people need to understand, and one is the fact that the idea of local anything is becoming an endangered species. And we do have, I believe, a right as local communities to have a certain amount of autonomy and to control and leverage our own rights of way and other resources. The other is an issue called net neutrality, which is a huge deal, because in these bills, basically, large companies are asking for the right to really control the speed and the accessibility of information and that goes on the internet.
Well, I was really surprised as I read about internet neutrality or the threat to it, the possibility, and how realistic is the possibility that a big corporation could decide that one page will load faster than another, or that one page will be easier to access than another, or that one page won't be available?
It's entirely possible, unless the concepts and the ideals of net neutrality are retained. It's sort of like if part of building a subdivision, a developer has to put in a road, a public street, a public access point, but yet then decides, well, they get to decide who gets to drive on it, or certain people can go faster and other people have to stay in the slow lane, and it's very similar to that. And you know, the beauty of the internet has been its everywhereness and its inherent fairness, because everyone can move in the same arena without having to qualify themselves in some way. And to have an entity basically be able to control the speed of the pipeline for those who pay them big money or who cooperate or whatever is just a very, very frightening kind of thing, because you know, we have the internet where there is tons of information available, and people in many ways has been democratizing and has the potential to be even more so. And absence, net neutrality being not part of the conversation could basically just cut that concept drastically.
The arguments go both ways. There's the argument about using public access or using public property for access for these lines, and then there was a comment that I think one of the big telco executives made about these are my tubes, was the word he used, that if the wires belong to the telecommunications company should have the right to dictate what goes through them.
The point of the matter, though, is it goes over public property.
Right. Yes.
There's two issues that I really see, and one is that let's say this. Let's say that everybody who wanted to have water had to put in their own pipes.
Pipeline.
Can you imagine the effect on our community's infrastructure?
Right.
No one is saying that that the entity that puts in infrastructure can't charge for use of that infrastructure. Nobody's saying that. What we're saying, however, is that it is in the public space, and if you're going to use my backyard, these are the terms, and we as a community have the right to discuss those terms. And I can't imagine, if you look back on phone lines, do we discriminate on what can be talked about? Is there someone there who's saying, well, you know, Joe really wants to use the phone, so get off the phone? A company doesn't have the authority to do that. And again, telephone, traditional twisted pair, you know, runs through the public rights of way, and that's how we create a system that works.
What kind of alternatives are being proposed by the access community if we lose the pegs, or we won't? These bills aren't suggesting that pegs should be eliminated, but there's a much, as you said, there's no individual community formula. There's a, is it 1%?
Well, there is a franchise fee currently, and it is 5%. And in many communities, including Grand Rapids, a portion of that is used to help pay for community access. And then many communities also have a 1% PEG fee. That's just one formula, however. And the reality is that in Santa Rosa there was no 1% PEG fee, but we did have equipment funds that came in over a period of time.
And these get, as it currently stands, cable companies have to renegotiate with the community every decade or so?
It depends on the length of the agreement.
Okay.
Typical is 15 years.
All right.
So it's not like it's happening all the time.
Right, but it does happen.
It does happen. And what's of concern, and I've sat at the table and tried to pound out details, enforcement details, renegotiation details, and so forth. There are very key issues that aren't going to be reflected in a national bill that have to do with how do you connect? Where are the lines? How does it happen? And absent those kinds of working out the devil in the details, you may end up with, in theory, channels, but no way to connect them.
Sure.
Or
no equipment to produce the.
Or yes, or maybe the cable or the new provider would make the assumption, well, you've got to pay for fiber to our plant, which could totally be impossible. Sure. So it's the how-to, it's the detail that happens at the local negotiating table, depending on whatever exists in that community.
But moving on, though, you've written and spoken about the need to begin with your vision of what community media is for, rather than to focus on the equipment, the toys, the gadgets sometimes drive community
Sure.
access more
Sure.
than the desire to communicate or to
Yes.
give people a voice.
Well, and I am certainly a strong advocate in leveraging public rights of way. And it's been a good formula, and I think it's a valid formula. But we also need to be careful to look at why we're here. There's been a lot of talk with the change to digital technology, and
Do we
with
even need
new
public access
opportunities.
if you can put your own show on the web?
And it depends on what you're calling public access. If we get stuck in we are, well, camcorders and in-house editing suites and all the tools and toys, as you say, that we have used, the chance for becoming obsolete is higher. And in many of our discussions with colleagues and in seminars, I'm really encouraging people to step backward and say, okay, let's look way back and when this whole experiment started and there was the Sony Portapack. What was this about? Was it about the Portapack? No, that doesn't, it's cold. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
What it's about is about stories. It's about communication. It's about knowing who we are, preserving our unique histories as communities, telling our stories, being able to speak for ourselves, which is critical in all fields, whether you're talking education, whether you're talking about community relations, whether you're talking about younger generation and older generation connecting and understanding each other. And, things that become nationalized have a tendency to lose the local
There's
flavor.
no personal connection.
Exactly. And that's what this is about, personal
Right.
connection.
But personal connection within community.
Yes.
We could each broadcast. I can put a blog, a personal diary on the internet for anyone to see. I could put a vlog. I could broadcast my own TV or my own video for anyone to see. But when I do that on a web page, I'm not part of a community necessarily.
That's true. And how is the distribution so that you're connecting with those whom you wish to connect with?
Right.
Where is
what links us?
Yes, what links us, what connects us. And there's something to be said for, a single person simply speaking versus the idea that as a community we're using these tools to connect. And, we can say this, it used to be everybody said, oh, well, anybody can build a web page. How many people really have their own web page without any assistance, that they can just do? The technology's out there, it's changing, and there will always be people on the cutting edge of utilizing this technology. But it is not easy for the average person or the nonprofit that's working with young kids or trying to help families empower themselves to take the time and the effort and the complication that's involved with figuring out how to best leverage technology. And that's really, I think, where media centers as gathering places, as incubators, as strategizing kind of entities can help figure out, is it all just about MySpace? Is it all about Google? Or is it taking these same tools and saying, how do we take this incredible power and really solidly apply it to the work we do as a community?
So the Community Media Center is not so much about providing everyone with these gadgets as looking at what can be done with these gadgets and with the knowledge to strengthen local
incredible
community.
empowerment.
Yeah.
And many of the empowering activities are very small, simple, but meaning a lot. One example is we have someone, a volunteer producer who works his tail off. He's a coach, and he decided to really pursue the idea of putting high school football games on TV. Sounds great, sounds simple, but what people don't necessarily understand is what's happening because of this. And there are academic criteria for students to be able to participate in, football,
Right.
etc. The grades and the academic achievement of these young men has increased because the pull and the excitement of being on
TV.
television, having their families and their neighborhoods and their communities see them on television. It's elevated because it's become more important. It's become so much a talk of the town kind of thing within neighborhoods and communities and school communities that there's more effort being put in because it is paired with academic achievement.
Laurie, how can we keep the pressure on to continue funding, to continue local access and local negotiating power for?
Well, I really think the first key is that we can't be passive as communities, that we need to understand the importance of being community and how it is threatened. Then we need to keep pressure, constant pressure on our legislators, senators, congressmen, both and our state legislators as well, to make certain that our voices, the voice of people and communities, are heard as loud or louder than large corporations. This is very, very difficult because of the amount of money that's being pumped in.
Corporations are putting tons of money to
I think there's massive quantities, increases in percentage of money being spent lobbying by large companies. But we do have power in numbers, and we do have the real stories of real people, which can be extremely compelling. We need to tell those stories. We also need to use the technology that exists now.
Use the community media that we already have.
Absolutely. To talk and educate our neighbors and to really create the rallying cry that is heard statewide and is heard at the federal level, to make sure that our voices aren't silenced because we don't have the same amount of money that a Bell Telephone type company has.
Great. Okay. Thank you. My guest today has been Laurie Cirivello, Executive Director of the Community Media Center in Grand Rapids. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.